Hello and welcome to MEE Live. I'm Matilda Mallinson. It's Tuesday, the 18th of November. Today, are Palestinians being trafficked out of Gaza? Last week, a plane carrying over 100 Palestinians touched down on South African soil, where 130 were granted humanitarian support. A refugee success story, except for two strange things. South Africa didn't know they were coming, and their passports had no exit stamps to mark the place they were leaving behind.
Yesterday, we had a plane of 160, we're carrying 160 Palestinians landing at OR Tambo. And these are people from Gaza who somehow mysteriously were put on a plane that passed by Nairobi and came here. We cannot turn them back. Even though they do not have the necessary documents and papers, these are people from a strife-torn, a war-torn country. And out of compassion, out of empathy, we must receive them and be able to deal with the situation that they are facing. And it does seem like they were being, flushed out. We will get the details later.
That was Cyril Ramaphosa, South Africa's president, saying it seemed like they had been flushed out. Why? The mystery plane, now at the heart of an international media storm, is just one of several charter flights organised by a shadowy firm to evacuate Palestinians from Ramon Airport in Israel to destinations around the world. That firm is called Al Majd Europe, which is described on its website as a humanitarian organisation. The website was created mere months ago. It says Al Majd provides humanitarian evacuations for Muslims in conflict zones. For this, it charges up to $2,700 a head. The website also says the company was founded in Germany and is headquartered in Jerusalem, but it is registered in neither. And when an Al Jazeera journalist visited the headquarters address, there was nothing there. Journalists looking into the company have met lots of dead ends. What can be found is one individual, dual Israel-Estonian national Toma Yanai Lind, who owns a trail of uncontactable companies in the UK and Dubai. He told Haaretz that Al Majd was behind the flight, but refused to disclose any further information. Haaretz also found one other backstory to the company. It was referred to Israel's military by a newfound department of Israel's Ministry of Defense. Israel calls this department the Voluntary Emigration Bureau. It exists to coordinate the transportation of Palestinians out of the occupied Gaza Strip. So is this plane a story of free movement and sanctuary, or a far darker tale of trafficking and ethnic cleansing? Could this even...
جايين من غزة هربين من الموت على جنوب أفريقيا. الحكومة في جنوب أفريقيا مش راضي تستقبلنا. إحنا هنا عالقين في المطار نرجو المساعدة.
Could this even be a story of geopolitical warfare between the historically hostile governments of Israel and South Africa? Here to shed light are MEE's senior reporter Azad Essa and one of the people who first boarded the plane when it landed in Johannesburg, analyst and activist Naeem Jina. Naeem, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And Azad, welcome to the studio.
Thanks.
So first, let's fill in the gaps. Naeem, what did you learn from the passengers on board about the journey that put them on this plane? How did they get there? Did they want to be there? Did they know where they were going?
Well, it's the typical story. I mean, this group, as well as a previous group, a plane that landed here on the 28th of October, same kind of modus operandi. They were invited through Telegram to go to a website if they wanted to leave Gaza, and this was early this year before the ceasefire, so-called ceasefire. Registered, paid an amount of money, and on a particular night, in this case at around 11 o'clock, they got a WhatsApp message to say the next morning they must meet at a particular place. Buses were there, there were only bus drivers. They crossed over the so-called border into Israel, where they were searched, a lot of their belongings taken, then onto Ramon Airport, put onto a chartered flight, ended up in Nairobi, put onto another chartered flight that ended up in Johannesburg. In both cases, for a long while, they didn't know where they were going. In the second, for the second plane, some of them were told when they were in Nairobi where they were going to end up. But they were also, one person was given a hotel booking for Mumbai, one for Kuala Lumpur, and so there was lots of confusion about where they're going to go, and they opened the doors to be in Johannesburg.
Confusion seems to be a sort of common thread in this story. There are a lot of unanswered questions. Azad, how was reporting on this story?
Yeah, we all saw the video of these Palestinians on this plane, and it was like a horrific video of them asking for assistance. And when you think about, there's so many irregularities when you start thinking about the story of why these Palestinians were there and kind of how they hadn't had any sort of documentation and the conditions on the flight itself. And normally when there's a kind of evacuation process, there would be a lot more transparency, there'll be a lot more organizations involved, a lot more procedures. And suddenly here you enter like an information desert. Like they didn't have, as you said, they didn't have stamps, exit stamps on their passports, and they didn't have any clear idea of where they were going. They didn't have accommodation for a long period of time. And what was also very unclear was who was responsible for this. And so as a journalist trying to figure out who Al-Majd is, who controls Al-Majd, how Al-Majd had essentially bought these tickets as well, every door that we would knock on will go nowhere, It was a very, very complicated story in that way.
Mm-hmm. Now, I want to be clear with this discussion. We're not here to comment on whether Palestinians should or shouldn't choose to leave Gaza. Palestinians should have as much freedom of movement as anybody else. The thing is, they don't. Gaza is under siege. Palestinians are systematically denied the right to travel. And so, what are we to make of this characterization by Israel of what's happening here as voluntary emigration? Naeem?
Well, there's no voluntariness when people are facing a genocide, when there's bombs falling on their head, etc. They were not really given a choice about anything. They just wanted to be safe. So from that perspective, there's that angle. But the other thing is, can you really call it voluntary when people were put on planes and not told where they were going? I mean, this is, consider a situation where people pay a whole lot of money, are put on trucks, and these trucks cross the borders without even them being told where they're going, without authorities being told what's in the trucks. It's the same kind of thing. So the voluntariness is not the issue here. It's that this resembles human trafficking, and proper arrangements have not been made around around the whole process. And when you have it done by an organization that initially is so shady that everyone on the flight knew that they booked through Al-Majd, but no one knew any more than that. And then we discover that actually this is, frankly, a project of the people who are committing the genocide. Then the whole question about whether it was voluntary or not is really irrelevant. This then becomes and should be seen as part of the project of ethnic cleansing of Gaza.
But isn't there a need for humanitarian evacuations? I mean, Azad, fill us in here, because as far as I'm aware, there's been a huge unmet need for medical evacuations during the course of the war. There's been a lot of reluctance from governments to accept Palestinian refugees. Isn't there a case that there should be more humanitarian evacuations from Gaza?
I mean, I don't think anyone is saying that Palestinians need to stay in Gaza. There's no suggestion that they shouldn't go out and seek help, shouldn't go out and live somewhere else for a while. But what are the conditions in which this took place? We're talking about people shoved onto a plane, even if they paid for it, right? Put onto a plane without any belongings except their clothes on their backs, going to places that they were not even sure of, like finally where the destination would be, and not given the stamp on their passport, which means that who knows if they'll be able to return. Gaza is in many parts of Gaza has been turned into a graveyard. right? There aren't enough medical facilities. There aren't enough facilities for running water. It's very, very difficult, obviously, to live there now. It's uninhabitable in many terms, right? So if people want to leave, they should be like any other population, any other people allowed to leave and be able to return as well. But I don't think this is what you call an evacuation, a voluntary evacuation or a humanitarian evacuation, because also the question has to be asked about the freedom of movement in terms of returning, and there's no indication of that.
Right, so the right to leave is one thing, but the right of return is another issue, and that's got a big question mark over it. Naeem, how big an issue is this lack of an exit stamp on people's passports?
So because the Zionists make a big issue about this, let me just make this point, that Israel no longer, for flights, no longer gives exit stamps. What they give people is a B/2 entry-exit form. The people on these two planes had no stamp, no form, nothing, no indication that they had exited any country. Now, this is a big thing because it's clearly, firstly, it's kind of illegal and a violation of the rights of those people, but it's clearly done in a way that they would end up in a country where they would have problems, and they would have problems then going back. Of course, Palestinians all over the world, and mostly not able to go back. But let me also make another point, Mitullah, that from the two flights that came to South Africa, and I'm not talking about other flights, I haven't met people from there. The two flights that came to South Africa, there's a general kind of profile of the people who are on those two planes. These are mostly professionals or business people. So for example, the first flight, 5 doctors, including I think 3 specialists, one of whom coordinated something like 20 UNRWA clinics. There were teachers. There's academics, there's computer scientists, IT specialists, psychologists, etc. This is the kind of, and business people, this is the kind of people that are being chosen to be removed. And so the question needs to be asked, what does that do to the people who are left in Gaza? We know, for example, that of academics, 70% of academics have been assassinated thus far. If we put the other 30% on planes and send them all around the world, even if we rebuild universities in Gaza, who's going to be teaching in those universities? Who's going to be teaching in those schools? Who's going to be staffing hospitals and clinics if the doctors and nurses are all over the world? And so the project is clearly part of the project of the bigger project of genocide.
You're right to point out that this is, of course, not happening in a vacuum. Palestinians are enduring one of the world's fiercest territorial disputes. There's essential historical context to include here. Our reporter Tamara Himani has more.
Fears that Israel intends to ethnically cleanse Gaza often go back to the 1948 Nakba, when Israel's military occupied the majority of historic Palestine, forcing 750,000 Palestinians to flee their homes. Some were told they would be allowed to return once the war had ended, but today, many remain in refugee camps in Jordan, Lebanon, and elsewhere, still waiting to go back. After the 1967 war, Israel's military occupied the remaining 22% of Palestinian land, assuring the world that it was a temporary measure for security reasons. But today, there are over 700,000 settlers in the occupied West Bank. Israel has restructured the land around these settlements, built military checkpoints, and diverted the water supply to serve them. And Palestinians have been forced into increasingly small enclaves. Israel's current government has rapidly advanced settlement in the occupied West Bank. But with the onset of the war in Gaza in October 2023, the Israeli right wing also began advocating to annex and resettle the Gaza Strip, as it had before 2005. Encouraged by US President Trump's remarks that he would build a Riviera in Gaza, the Israeli right leapt into action.
יכולים לחזור לגוש קטיף! אנחנו יכולים לחזור הביתה ואנחנו יכולים לעשות עוד דבר, לעודד הגירה! לעודד הגירה! לעודד הגירה!
We have to return to the Gaza Strip and establish Jewish communities right away, all over the Strip. The Arab will not stay in Gaza.
האזרחים העזתים מרוכזים בדרום, מיואשים לחלוטין, מבינים שאין שם תוחלת והם לחפש בעזה, הם מתחילים לצאת במספרים גדולים מאוד למדינות שלישיות.
The idea gained popularity when repackaged last year as the voluntary emigration of Palestinians. Israel's government set up a voluntary emigration bureau in March, and 82% of Jewish Israelis said they supported the idea when polled. Senior US and Israeli officials also began holding talks with African countries such as Sudan, Somalia, Somaliland, Uganda, and Libya to take in Palestinians. And after 2 years of war, Gaza is largely uninhabitable. 92% of housing units have been destroyed. Most Palestinians are now forced to live in makeshift tents, which are collapsing under winter weather. No investment has been given for reconstruction, with machinery and building supplies still being blocked at the border. Netanyahu said in September that he was progressing plans for voluntary emigration. But when homes are destroyed, rebuilding is obstructed, and aid is withheld, how much choice do people really have?
Naeem, you questioned how voluntary any choice can be made in these conditions. You also called it ethnic cleansing. Your government accepted the passengers on this flight, however. Does that set a dangerous precedent?
So they arrived and they were given 90-day visas, as all Palestinians have the right to. Yes, there was a problem. Normally, when people come to get, as tourists or visitors, they expected that they have some proof of exit from somewhere, that they have accommodation, that they have a return ticket. An exception was made in this case precisely, as the president said, on compassionate grounds. The concern within the South African government is that we also don't want to be part of the ethnic cleansing. So what we are saying is that in future, what the government is saying rather, that in future, these flights need to be stopped at source, that when people do pitch up on our borders, we have a constitutional responsibility to assist them. In the case of both of these flights, flights, people were allowed in on those 90-day visas. Many of them have decided that they will go to other countries, they have families, etc. And some of them will apply for asylum. If they apply for asylum, they'll be investigated as normal, and many of them will likely get asylum. But the South African government is very careful to make the point that we don't want to be accomplices in an ethnic cleansing project.
An ethnic cleansing project. Now, there's another term I want to discuss here that I haven't seen mentioned much. I'm an immigration reporter, and there are quite specific legal terms for different types of migration. Voluntary emigration, that's not a term that exists, because it's not really a necessary term. Generally, we just call this emigration. But there are various types of non-voluntary emigration. Displacement is one. That's when refugees are forced to flee their home countries due to war, persecution, or disaster. Ethnic cleansing, we've discussed. And there's another term, which we generally use here, when money changes hands: trafficking. Human trafficking involves the recruitment and transportation of people for the purpose of exploitation. The company behind these flights calls itself a humanitarian operator, but it charged passengers $2,000 for a seat on the flight and took them into a country without official documentation and right to entry. Azad, is this not human trafficking?
As you say, human trafficking essentially talks about or means a form of exploitation. Now, you have people living in Gaza in desperate situations, living in conditions that are in many ways uninhabitable. Now, you're asking these people to pay $1,500, $2,000, $3,000, $5,000 to leave. You're stripping away their rights. You're stripping away their right to information. You're dumping them in another place, not giving them any sense of facilitation or navigation rights or spaces to sort of like understand their new place that they are being dumped in. And then you're calling that sort of like voluntary, evacuation. So there are many activists who are talking about this as a form of human trafficking. And I think if it resembles it, it probably is it.
Right, because if that's a question that we're asking, then there's questions of culpability, and people should be criminally liable. People who are making money off of something they're calling humanitarian evacuation, surely they should be charged under trafficking laws.
I mean, if you think about the story here, how many people are complicit in the story? You have the Al-Majd, then you have the airline company that basically took these people over, not asking any questions, and not even giving them food and water on the plane, locking them up in the plane. I think Naeem spoke to me earlier for my story, in which he told me about how when he went onto the plane, he found that children, babies, right, hadn't had their nappies changed in 48 hours. We're talking about horrendous conditions. Now, part of that is there seems to be an entire ecosystem that's actually benefiting out of this. So we're talking about Al-Majd, then we have the airline, then you have the airline, the consultancy company that actually contacted the airline, then you have the Israeli immigration officials as well. There's so many lines here.
Right, and that seems to be a sort of common theme on the question of what's happening in Palestine is when it comes to accountability, where does the buck stop? Now, finally, I want to talk about the geopolitical implications of this just before we wrap the show. It's hard to believe that it was a coincidence that the country in which this plane landed just happened to be South Africa. South Africa and Israel are at loggerheads over Palestine. South Africa calls it an apartheid. They see it as a continuation of their own historic struggle against apartheid, and they have accused Israel of genocide in the International Court of Justice. This is also a high-stakes week for South Africa as it hosts the continent's first G20 summit. Naeem, why do you think that this plane landed specifically in South Africa? Is that relevant?
That's relevant. So, of course, the kind of obvious thing is that South Africa is one of just a handful of countries which would give Palestinians visa-free access or visa on arrival kind of access. So that makes it, of course, an easy target, let's say, for such trafficking operations, because people can just be dumped here and they'll have to be taken care of in some or other kind of way. But the other issue is important, and one indication about that is, so the flight landed on Thursday morning at 8 a.m. By late morning, Israeli media and various Israeli social media accounts were already speaking about it with this term, South Africa's hypocrisy. And saying that, you launched a case at the ICJ, but you can't even look after these refugees. Of course, they ignore the fact that they created the refugees. And so clearly it played into that anti-South African kind of mood. And coming at this particular time when this G20 is for South Africa, of course, it's critical because it's a big event that we're hosting, etc. But it's also critical for other reasons. At least two countries that we know of have pulled out: the United States and I forget which South American country, Argentina, I think, that supports the US. The US is not sending a single diplomat to this G20. They're not going to receive a proper handover of the G20 because they're supposed to chair it next year. And there's this whole kind of barrage and an attack from the United States against South Africa for what Trump calls a white genocide, as the kind of defender of white supremacy globally. And so coming at this point in time, it raises also a whole range of other questions. Number one, diverting kind of security and other resources to deal with this issue. Number two, creating within the country, and this has already started being created within South Africa, this kind of thing: oh, who are these people? Are they Israeli spies? Are they Hamas, etc.? Which creates, who have been sent at this particular time to disrupt the G20 or this, that, or the other. I mean, some of the people on that on those flights said to us yesterday, after they watched the news and they read about the G20, etc., said, in the next week, should we just stay in our homes and not go out? Would that be safer for us and for South Africa? Clearly, they understand that part of now, I don't know whether this is the main reason for sending these people to South Africa, or whether it's just a convenient bonus for the Israelis that you're attacking South Africa.
Azad, quickly, anything to follow up with that? Could this be a geopolitical attack by Israel on South Africa? If so, how much of a problem has it caused?
No, I think just to buttress what Naeem said, there is this other element that the South African government is made up of a government of national unity. And this means that there are many parties that are governing the country.
Like a coalition government.
The coalition government. And so that means that there isn't a unified, position on Israel and Palestine amongst all the parties. And so this could be an attempt also to kind of like exploit those internal fissures as well.
Right. Well, thank you both so much. That is all that we have time for on today's show. But to our audience, we would love to hear your thoughts before we go, so please send in your thoughts, comments and questions. You can reach us on social media at Middle East Eye or email meelive@middleeasteye.net. We'll be here every Tuesday and Thursday, 5 p.m. UK time, noon in New York. See you then.